I don't think Russell Wilson gets nearly enough credit that he deserves for what he does on the field. So people will try to like defend it by saying, "Oh, his team" or "Oh, his coaching." Russell Wilson has a championship and he's a seven-time Pro Bowler and he's been named to an All-Pro team as a quarterback. To me, I think he's missing a couple of awards, possible MVPs, maybe. But I know he has a championship. He's a Super Bowl quarterback that led his team to a championship, and ever since that team is dissolved, he's been the player keeping that team afloat along with Bobby Wagner. But Russell Wilson's been holding it down the offensive end. How you guys doing? It is July 19th, 2020. I here in this quarantine. I'm James Sims, and for this episode of The Elite, I'm going to do a piece on Russell Wilson, who, if you are unaware of Russell Wilson, he is a 31-year-old quarterback who currently plays for the Seattle Seahawks. He stands in at 5'11", 215 pounds. For a quarterback, that's not incredibly tall, but he's still able to move with his body, and he's one of the one of the most elite passers you'll ever see through the football. Statistically, in the past couple of years, he's been the league's statistically most efficient deep ball passer. And with the options that he's had on his team in recent years, he's gotten the Seahawks to the playoffs in years they kind of really shouldn't have, but a lot of it does go to their defense, and they're coached very, very well. And despite the fact that he's 5'11", Russell Wilson has been a seven-time Pro Bowler, being recognized as one of the league's best passers and the league's most famed position. I don't think he gets nearly enough credit, especially as a black quarterback, for what he's done. So just to give you a little bit of background, he's from Richmond, Virginia. Went to collegiate school. That's the name of the school. He went to high school out there. He would end up being recruited to play baseball and football at North Carolina State. And in his very first season in North Carolina State, his freshman year, he would go on to play 11 games that year, finishing with 1,955 yards, passing with 17 touchdowns and one interception through the air. On the ground, he'd also add another 388 yards and four touchdowns with about 2,300 yards and 21 touchdowns to his name his first year. The North Carolina State Wolfpack would go on to finish 6-7. They would lose to Rutgers in the PapaJohns.com Bowl in 2018, but that was Russell Wilson's very first year on the national stage, where everyone got to see what kind of a young player he is. He would end up being the ACC Offensive Rookie of the Year and the overall ACC Rookie of the Year after being named for the first team All-ACC in his very first year of being at North Carolina State, due to his lack of interceptions and his ability to get the Wolfpack to playoffs despite all that. Going on to his next season, his sophomore year in North Carolina State. As a sophomore, he would play all 12 games that season. He would finish with 3,027 yards passing, with 31 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. On the ground, he'd add another 260 yards and four touchdowns, amounting to a total of 35 touchdowns on the season for a Wolfpack team that would finish 5-7 on the year, and wouldn't qualify for bowl games. But Russell Wilson was still being recognized as one of the better young players in all of college football, but he would still go back to North Carolina State and prove that he was still that guy. In his junior year in 2010 for North Carolina State, he would play 13 games in a season where the North Carolina State Wolfpack finished 9-4 overall, finishing with a 25 ranking by the AP. And under Tom O'Brien, they beat West Virginia in the Champion State Bowl in 2010, with Russell Wilson leading the charge. And that season, as a junior at North Carolina State in the ACC, he finished with 3,563 passing yards this season, completing 58% of his passes, finished with 28 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, also adding 435 yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground to add to 37 total touchdowns for the North Carolina State offense. And at this point, Russell Wilson had established himself as one of the elite young passers in all of college football. He was named to the second team All-ACC in his junior year. And instead of choosing to go to the NFL, he would choose to transfer and play at Wisconsin. And he would start for the Wisconsin Badgers in 2011. And that year he would start 14 games for a Wisconsin Badger team that would end up winning the Big Ten, and they would finish 11th ranked after losing to the Oregon Ducks in the Rose Bowl by a touchdown. But Russell Wilson that season, after leading the Badgers to winning the Big Ten, he finished with 3,175 total yards, completing 72.8% of his passes, throwing for 33 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, and then adding 338 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground, totaling for 39 touchdowns and 4 interceptions given away for the entirety of the season, which is mind-boggling for how good college football quarterbacks were then. He was definitely one of the better. He was named to the first team All Big Ten. He was named the quarterback of the year, given the Greasy Breeze Quarterback of the Year award within the Big Ten. And this is what he had accomplished right before he got into the pros. He had gotten from North Carolina State, become one of their best quarterbacks. He transferred to Wisconsin, an actual title team, got them to being a top 10 team in the nation, but they eventually made it short. And going into the draft, there were questions as to what a 5'11" quarterback can do, no matter how good he was at Wisconsin and how well he could complete passes. He's still going to be small. But in the 2012 NFL draft, the Seattle Seahawks took a chance and picked him with the 75th overall pick in the 3rd round. And ever since then, Russell Wilson has been the starting quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. And in his very first year, in 2012, he would earn a Pro Bowl appearance after starting all 16 of the games he would play in a season where he would finish 11-5 as a quarterback. And the Seahawks would go on to beat the Redskins in the first round and lose to the Falcons in the second round. That was his very first year in the league. He already won a playoff game in his very first season as a quarterback. That season, he would go on to throw for 3,188 yards and completing 68% of his passes. He would also go on to throw for 26 touchdowns and 10 interceptions in that season. While on the ground, he was still running for 89 yards and 4 touchdowns on the season. I mean, adding that's 30 total touchdowns on the season for a Seattle Seahawks team that was a couple games away from making it to the Super Bowl. So I mean, that's all I have to say. That's what he was. That was his very first season in the league. So, and he had been named a Pro Bowler. So within 1 year, he went from being the Big Ten quarterback of the year to being named a Pro Bowler, one of the top 6 or top 8 recognized quarterbacks in the NFL as a rookie. His 2013 season, when he was 25, Russell Wilson would then go on to start 16 games in a season where the Seahawks would go 13-3, and they would go on to beat the Saints in the divisional playoffs. They would beat the 49ers in the NFC Championship game, and they would go on to beat the Broncos 43-8 and win the championship. And this was Russell Wilson's this was his second season in the league, and he had already played 5 playoff games, and he'd only lost 1 game in the 2 appearances he made in the playoffs within his first, he's 4-1 in his first 5 playoff games. At that point, I feel like that's iconic. Even no matter how good his team was, Russell Wilson was still a Pro Bowl quarterback that got his team there, because Russell Wilson was named to the Pro Bowl in his second season. By that point, he had 2 appearances, and by the beginning of his age 26 season in 2014, he already had 2 Pro Bowl appearances, recognizes one of the league's best quarterbacks, and not by mistake, not a fluke, and he was already a Super Bowl champion. And he was a proven quarterback, especially in those games. No matter how good his defense was, he still had to help his team score on the other end. So now, transitioning into his age 26 season, Russell Wilson would start all 16 games in a season where the Seahawks would finish 12-4, winning the NFC West for the second year in a row. They would go on to beat the Panthers 31-7 in the divisional playoffs. They beat the Packers in overtime in the NFC Championship. They would go on to lose to the Patriots 28-4, as Russell Wilson was the player that threw an interception on the 1-yard line to Malcolm Butler. That most definitely happened in 2014, and they were one handoff away from being a 2-time back-to-back champs within his first 2 years in the league. And the Seahawks had never really gotten that far they hadn't gotten back to the Super Bowl since. But at that point, Russell Wilson was still that was Russell Wilson after his 3rd season. And even though he wasn't named an All-Star or a Pro Bowler that season, he still finished throwing for 3,400 yards, completing 63% of his passes, throwing for 20 touchdowns and 7 interceptions, also contributing another 849 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. The most rushing yards and rushing touchdowns he's ever had in a season, but he would not go on to make the Pro Bowl that year. But at that point, he was still a quarterback who had already been named to 2 Pro Bowls in his first 3 years and a Super Bowl winning one at that. So going on to his age 27 season in 2015, he would go on to start all 16 games in a season where the Seahawks would finish 10-6. Finishing second in the NFC West. They would beat the Vikings in the playoffs 10-9. They would lose to the Panthers 31-24. The year that Cam Newton was on his MVP tear. That season, Russell Wilson would go on to finish throwing for 4,024 yards, the first time he'd ever thrown for 4,000 yards in his career, completing 68% of his passes, throwing for 34 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, leading the league in passing rate or quarterback rate, and he was averaging 251 yards per game. He added an additional 553 yards and a touchdown on the ground. And this is the instance for the third time in his first 4 years in the league, Russell Wilson was named a Pro Bowler, and he was named among the league's best quarterbacks. And to be doing so, that has to mean you were a really, really good quarterback. And the fact that he's done it 3 in his first 4 years is more impressive than a lot of others, because you can't say that about a lot of Hall of Fame quarterbacks right now. And at this point, he's still going, and the Seahawks are still a playoff team. They haven't missed a playoff since he's been there. In his age 28 season, he would start all 16 games in a season where the Seahawks would finish 10-5-1. They would go on to finish first in the NFC West. They would beat the Lions in the first round of the playoffs in 26-6, and they would lose to the Falcons 36-20. But Russell Wilson still kind of really doing his own thing. He missed the Pro Bowl this year, but he still finished throwing for 4,219 yards, completing 64.7% of his passes, the most yards he had thrown up to date. He had 21 touchdowns and 11 interceptions on the season. He was sacked for the most amount of yards out of all quarterbacks that season, sacked for 293 total yards, sacked 41 total times. And then on the ground, he was adding 259 yards and a touchdown. But up until then, he's thrown for 4,000 yards for the second time in his career. And even though he didn't make a Pro Bowl, he still has 3 in his first 5 years, in addition to being a Super Bowl quarterback who was a Pro Bowl of the year he was quarterback. Moving on to his age 29 season in 2017, he would finish starting all 16 games in a season where the Seattle Seahawks would finish 9-7 and missed the playoffs for the only time in his career since he's been there, by the way. Only time they've missed. They were 9-7. That year, Russell Wilson would finish throwing for 3,983 yards, completing 61% of his passes. He led the league in touchdown passes with 34, the only time he had done it in his career. He had also finished with 11 interceptions on the season, the third time in his career he finished with double-digit interceptions. On the ground, he would go on to finish with 586 yards on three touchdowns. And in addition to those, he finished with 37 total touchdowns for a Seattle Seahawks team that would not go on to make the playoffs because they had lost some of their pieces. But this was still a perennial team, and Russell Wilson had proven he had been an all-star, at least a top-level quarterback for the 4th time in his 6-year career up until then. And then this would lead into his 2018 season, where he started all 16 games in a season where the Seahawks would finish 10-6. They finished second in the NFC West, and they were going to lose to the Cowboys in the wild card by 2 points. But that season, Russell Wilson would finish throwing for 3,448 yards, completing 66% of his passes. And on the ground, he'd add 376 yards to that. He would also go on to throw for 35 touchdowns, the most he's ever had in his career. He would lead the league, though, and he'd finish with 7 interceptions on the season, despite the team that was around him. That was his age 30 season in 2018. And at that point, he won back-to-back, and that was his 5th Pro Bowl in 7 seasons. And I don't know if you understand, 6 or 8 quarterbacks are named. And then except for if a quarterback goes to the Super Bowl, then they have to get replaced by someone. But Out of the 32 quarterbacks that play in the National Football League, very few get to be named Pro Bowlers. And Russell Wilson's been consistently doing it. And going into his age 31 season, he clinched his 6th Pro Bowl in his 8 seasons of being in the league. And considering how few quarterbacks make it, the fact that he was able to make it so easily, he made it 75% of the seasons he's been in the league at quarterback. And in this most recent season, he had his 4th season throwing over 4,000 yards, where he threw for 4,110 while completing 66% of his passes, throwing for 31 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And he would go on to lead the league in times sacked. And on the ground, he'd add an additional 342 yards and 3 touchdowns. Basically, bring the total up to 34 total touchdowns for a Seattle Seahawks team that finished 11-5. They would go on to beat the Eagles in the wild card round and lose to the Packers 28-23 in the divisional playoffs. But with all that said, I'm looking at Russell Wilson right now as a 31-year-old quarterback in a position where, considering how accurate he passes, he's probably going to be in the league for a good amount of time. And considering how he's in amazing shape, I don't think he's going to fall off very soon. He's going to be a very elite quarterback this season, as he has Chris Carson as his running back. He has Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. They might have a chance of getting Antonio Brown in this offseason. That whole announcement hasn't been made up until this point. But you look at Russell Wilson's career, you look at him as a 31-year-old quarterback who, in his 8 years in the league, has been named to the Pro Bowl 6 times, which I don't even know if there are a good amount of I feel like there are a good amount of Hall of Fame quarterbacks that haven't been named to the Pro Bowl 6 times, or just really, really good ones over time that haven't made it to 6 Pro Bowls, at least by the time they were 31. Russell Wilson's doing so, and looking back, there are a lot of quarterbacks that haven't won the Super Bowl. Russell Wilson can look back and say he was the starting quarterback on the Super Bowl team, which is a flex that not a lot of other quarterbacks can say. And with everything else said, I mean, he was also named to the 2nd team All-Pro this past season, the first time he's ever been named to an All-Pro team. So if you're going to ask me if Russell Wilson, as of right now, is elite, I would most definitely say he is. I'd say he's definitely getting better and better as a quarterback, and he's now starting to get recognition for his accuracy and how he's really making Seattle look a lot better than they are, especially with what he's been able to do on offense with the talent that he's had in Seattle ever since the Super Bowl years. And with that, I appreciate you for listening to all 17, 18 minutes of this. If you ever get a chance, peep my boy Russell Wilson. He reps quarterback, or is number 3 for the Seattle Seahawks. And if you ever get a chance when you watch him, just see how much he does for his team, then really ask yourself, how many other quarterbacks can make being a quarterback look this easy? And with that, I've said my piece. Peace out.